Welcome to Deep Dive, a sort of personal project that I felt I had to share. I have more than 30 books in queue and probably another 30 topics that I want to learn more about. And sometimes I want to hear a summary before I invest a couple of days of deep dive. This podcast is a result of that need. With the help of some Google apps and tools, what you have here is a podcast format that is surprisingly entertaining, even if it's a bit comprehensive. For this episode, we talk about John Dee. Our sources are a book by John Dee on astronomy, The Descending Hierarchies, The Hieroglyphic Monad, and Tuba Veneris, all by John Dee.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into the fascinating and often contradictory world of John Dee.
A true Renaissance figure.
Absolutely. I mean, think about this. Here's someone who wasn't just claiming conversations with angels,
Right.
but was also a highly respected mathematician, consulted by the very navigators charting England's course back then.
It's this blend, this seeming contradiction, the occult and the mathematical, that's so intriguing, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's what we're going to explore today.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we've got some really interesting sources. We're looking at excerpts from John Dee's own Astronomy, Propaedeunata, Aphoristica.
From 1558 to 1568, that period.
Yeah, giving us a window into his thinking then.
Yeah.
And also material connected to the very enigmatic Tuba Veneris.
Right. So our mission today, really, is to understand how someone like Dee navigated the intellectual landscape of his time.
A time when the lines between mathematics, astronomy, and what we'd now call occult philosophies they were much more blurred than they are now.
Definitely. And we also want to touch on how historians today see him. Where does he fit in relation to the scientific revolution? Was he part of it? Outside it?
That's the big question, really.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with Dee as a mathematician and, I guess, an applied scientist.
Sounds good. Mm-hmm. And the first thing to grasp is that mathematics in the 16th century wasn't quite what we think of today.
Right, not just algebra and calculus.
Not at all. It was a much, much broader field. It covered arithmetic and geometry, sure, but also areas we'd now separate out.
Like physics, engineering.
Exactly. Physics, engineering, cosmography, which is basically mapping the cosmos, architecture, surveying, even things like military fortification.
Wow.
And cartography, astronomy, navigation. It was all sort of lumped under mathematics. A very practical, hands-on field, but also deeply philosophical.
Which kind of explains why some mathematicians back then felt the need to legitimize their work, linking it to Plato and those ideas.
Precisely. These Platonizing philosophies, drawing on Plato, gave numbers and geometry this special, almost divine status. Geometrical proof was seen as just one step below divine reasoning itself.
So numbers weren't just tools, they were the building blocks of reality.
That was the idea, fundamental to the structure and the ongoing order of the universe. And Dee was right in the thick of the practical side, too.
He was a consultant, right?
Yes, a mathematical consultant. And his inventory apparently was quite something. Astronomical instruments by Gemma-Frisius, Mercator's globes.
The best stuff available then.
Pretty much. And he wasn't just hoarding them, he was teaching. He gave instructions on using the celestial globe to Edward VI.
Young king, yeah.
Who was apparently quite keen on astronomy. Dee even wrote a tract for him about the sizes and distances of planets and stars, something he'd really studied in Louvain.
And got paid for it too, I gather.
Oh yes, a rather nice annuity, which he later, quite cleverly, turned into income from church rectories. But beyond the practical stuff, his Propaedeunata Aphoristica is really key to understanding his mathematical thought.
Though maybe a bit complex.
It is. Some critics see it as a mix,
Right.
Genuine invention alongside a bit of a puffery or self-promotion. But it definitely shows him engaging with the big mathematical ideas of the day.
And he was involved in observational astronomy too, something about a supernova.
That's right. After that big supernova appeared in Cassiopeia in 1572, he was trying to figure out the parallax of circumpolar objects.
Parallax being the apparent shift when you view something from different positions.
Exactly. Trying to measure the distance, essentially.
Yeah.
His actual observations are lost, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But he claimed he'd figured out the method 20 years earlier.
And his interest went beyond the stars, right? To the seas.
Oh, very much so. Maritime matters were huge for him. He drew up these ambitious plans for a British Navy.
Like how to build it, fund it.
Everything. Timber, manpower, even how to tax people for it. He also got into biblical geography, trying to locate Ophir.
King Solomon's gold market.
That's the one. He was advocating voyages there.
But his practical advice wasn't always perfect, was it? Thinking of Martin Frobisher.
Ah, yes. The Northwest Passage Expedition. Dee instructed Frobisher, but he also certified the ore Frobisher brought back as containing gold.
Which it didn't.
Nope. Turned out to be worthless. That detail certainly complicates the picture of Dee as just a brilliant advisor.
Yeah, a bit of a reality check.
Though interestingly, he kept pushing for a Northeast Passage later on, even when continental mapmakers thought it was impossible.
Why did he stick to that?
His reasoning there was maybe a bit shakier. He relied partly on Abulfeda's geography, a medieval Arab text,
Which wasn't totally reliable.
especially for the far north, and it didn't even know about the Americas. So Dee himself had reasons to doubt it, but he still used it to argue for the passage.
Okay, so shifting focus slightly, but still within this idea of applied math. What about this graduation of qualities? Mixing hot and cold.
Ah, yes, this is fascinating. He was looking at how qualities like hot, cold, or moist, dry combine when substances are mixed.
Sounds almost like early chemistry or physics.
It does, doesn't it? His approach, using a kind of algebraic reasoning, actually anticipates formulas for heat-mixing calorimetry that came much later, in the 18th century.
Really? So he was ahead of his time there.
In a way, yeah. It really shows mathematics becoming increasingly important for describing physical processes, something Dee was clearly passionate about.
It wasn't just physicsy stuff, though. He tackled pure geometry problems, too.
Oh, yes. Those classic ancient Greek problems really captured the imagination back then. Squaring the circle, doubling the cube.
Problems that are actually impossible with just ruler and compass.
Exactly. Dee got into related problems, particularly concerning mean proportionals finding geometric means between values. He showed how to find lines whose ratio matched the volumes of given cubes, which ties directly into that whole doubling the cube challenge. It connects back to Euclid.
And all this mathematical work happened alongside big developments in map making, like Mercator's projection.
Right. Creating accurate charts for sailors was a massive challenge.
Because on a flat map, lines of constant compass bearing aren't straight.
Usually they're spirals, on standard plane charts. Mercator's genius was stretching the map towards the poles in a specific way.
So those constant bearing lines, the rhumb lines, become straight, much easier for navigation.
Precisely. And Dee, being close to Mercator and deeply involved in geometry, would have understood the sophisticated math behind these new charts. It built on the kind of geometric foundations he worked on.
So, okay, we've got Dee, the serious mathematician, involved in observation, navigation, geometry. But then there's this other side, the occult side. And this is where the debate really kicks in, right?
This is the core of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Was he primarily a mathematician pushing towards science, or was he mainly an occultist?
Or could he be both?
Well, that's one influential view, that these Renaissance figures, these applied mathematicians who were often inspired by Platonism or even occult ideas, were actually crucial forerunners of the scientific revolution.
And Dee fits that mold. Deeply into occultism and a mathematical pioneer.
That perspective definitely positions him that way. An exemplar, if you like, of both.
But not everyone buys that interpretation.
No. You have admirers who focus on his math and his interest in Hermeticism.
That's the philosophy linked to Hermes Trismegistus, esoteric knowledge, cosmic connections.
Right. They see potential there. But then you have detractors who point to things like his Hieroglyphic Monad, which is pretty dense and mystical.
And the angel conversations.
And the angel conversations, definitely. And they also argue he might have been quite vain, leading to his historical importance perhaps being a bit inflated.
It really feels like the lines were just incredibly blurry back then. You mentioned Hermeticism and Pythagorean ideas influencing math. How did that actually work?
Well, there seems to have been this real cross-pollination. Mathematics wasn't just calculation. For many, it was a key to understanding the universe's hidden structure.
A divine structure.
Often, yes. Accessible through numbers, geometry, harmony. It wasn't just about practical results, but about deeper meaning.
And Dee himself definitely saw it that way.
Oh, absolutely. He wrote about mathematics revealing the divine plan, the mathematics of creation. He used phrases like comfortable allurement and ravishing persuasion. You could feel his enthusiasm. For him, math was ancient, fundamental, close to the Creator's work.
Which brings us neatly to astrology. How did someone like Dee approach that? It seems like he tried to apply his mathematical mind to it.
That's a good way to put it. He took the traditional ideas of his time, Ptolemaic astronomy, the four elements, alchemy, Neoplatonic sympathy, and tried to think about them mathematically.
Using light as a model, you mentioned the multiplication of species.
Yeah, that was his analogy. How does light spread out? How does it reflect and refract? He thought maybe other influences, astrological ones, could work similarly, allowing for a more quantifiable understanding.
So trying to put numbers to things that were usually just described qualitatively.
Exactly. Compare him to someone like Cardano, another major figure interested in astrology. Cardano dismissed demonic influence, which was quite progressive.
But he didn't have a system.
Right. He mostly relied on interpreting birth charts, collecting old sayings or aphorisms. Dee seems to have been aiming for something more systematic, more mathematically grounded.
And he was part of that Louvain group, Gemma Frisius Mercator. Were they interested in astrology too?
Their attitudes varied, but there was definitely interest. Gogava, one of the group, even did a full Latin translation of Ptolemy's Petrobiblos, which is the foundational text of traditional astrology. So these ideas were definitely in the air among scholars.
So how did Dee imagine these astrological influences actually worked? You mentioned the comparison to light.
He thought of them as species-like rays that followed laws of reflection and refraction, similar to light.
But stronger.
Able to penetrate matter more deeply than light, yes. He even compared it to magnetism, which was another mysterious force acting at a distance. But astrological influence for him was much broader, more cosmic.
Did he assign specific roles, like the sun is hot, the moon is?
Yes, the traditional associations. Sun is the principle of heat, moon is the principle of moisture. But his Renaissance view was generally more optimistic than some medieval views. He didn't think planets were inherently evil.
But they could cause harm.
Yes, if their influence hit corrupt matter, as he put it. The problem wasn't the stars themselves, but the interaction.
It sounds incredibly complicated to actually track or predict these things. Did he realize that?
Oh, absolutely. He knew the Earth is constantly bathed in this complex, ever-changing web of rays. Every single point in space, at every moment, receives unique radiation.
And the effect depends on what's receiving the ray.
Exactly. The nature of the receiver matters. He even tried large-scale data collection in Louvain, thousands of observations.
Trying to find patterns.
Presumably. But imagine the scale. He calculated there were over 25,000 possible types of planetary conjunctions alone. Analyzing that kind of data, it must have seemed overwhelming.
25,000? Wow. No wonder it's hard to make predictions.
And that's before considering the planet's actual movements. Daily motion, yearly cycles, retrograde motion.
Where they appear to move backward.
Right. He noted how all these movements would change the way planetary powers combine during conjunctions. Were their powers similar? Different? It just explodes into this huge number of possibilities.
Okay, so we have Dee, the mathematician, wrestling with complexity in navigation, geometry, and even trying to quantify astrology. Now, let's get into the really murky stuff. Tuba Veneris.
The Trumpet of Venus. Yes, this one's controversial.
Especially whether Dee actually wrote it. What does this whole debate tell us?
Well, the text itself says it's by Dee. My Bella Veneri Negro Sacra Vel Tuba Veneris. The little book sacred to the Black Venus, or the Trumpet of Venus.
Sounds pretty occult.
It is. But many scholars, particularly Meyer, have raised serious doubts about Dee's authorship. And the debate itself really highlights how tricky it is to fit someone like Dee neatly into our modern boxes.
What are the main arguments against him writing it?
Meyer lays out several key points. First, the manuscripts we have seem to come from the continent, script-wise. Okay. There's no copy in Dee's known handwriting.
Okay.
Second, and this is a big one, Dee kept detailed diaries. He wrote a lot. And there is no mention of Tuba Veneris anywhere in his known writings.
That is suspicious.
Then there's the date and place given in the text itself, London, June 4th, 1580. But Dee's diary says he was at home in Mortlake around then, not London.
Why would a forger get that wrong? Or why would Dee write London if he was in Mortlake?
Good question. Mortlake was where he did his alchemy and magic. Also, June 4th, 1580 was a Saturday. Friday is Venus's day, astrologically. Writing a Venus text on a Saturday seems odd.
Right. Bad timing.
And finally, the type of magic. Tuba Veneris describes forcing spirits, binding them, that's negromancy. Dee's known magic from the 1580s, his angel conversations, was much more religious, based on prayer, angelic guidance. It seemed quite different in tone and method.
Those seem like pretty strong arguments against it being his. Are there any points for it being Dee's?
Meyer acknowledges a few, though maybe less convincing. The Latin style is decent neoclassical Latin, a bit like Dee's confirmed work, Propaedeunata Aphoristica.
Okay.
The earliest manuscript we have is from around 1600, plus or minus, so within Dee's lifetime. And it's a bit unusual for a forgery to invent such a specific date and time of composition.
True, why bother?
And Meyer does note that Dee himself admitted having a particular affection for the angel of Venus. So there are hints, but the weight of evidence seems against his authorship.
So, okay, maybe Dee didn't write it, but what kind of magical tradition does it represent? Where does it fit?
It definitely fits within the Solomonic tradition, magic supposedly derived from King Solomon, but it also pulls in influences from Hermes Trismegistus, Ptolemy, Peter Dauno, and especially Cornelius Agrippa.
Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy.
Exactly. There's a strong Neoplatonic current, likely filtered through Agrippa. And while lots of these magical texts just rehash older stuff, Tuba Veneris seems to be a fairly novel synthesis, weaving these different threads together in its own way. The ritual itself is very structured, very detailed.
You mentioned black Venuses and pagan links.
Yes, the opening line talks about the name Venus being given by the gods, a superis, that points straight back to classical mythology. And the frontispiece image shows Venus in this red-black cloak, holding magical tools.
At her blackness.
Seems linked to the 6 spirits invoked in the text, who are described as nocturnal, infernal dwellers.
6 spirits. You mentioned the number 6 is important in the text.
Very, it's everywhere. The seal is 6-sided, there are 6 demons, the ritual circle is 6 feet across.
Why 6?
It likely comes from Pythagorean philosophy, which associated the number 6 with Venus, generation, marriage. It's interesting because Dee's known magical work, the Heptarchia Mystica, is all based on 7.
A clear contrast.
A very clear contrast. Though Agrippa also mentioned 6 in connection with Venus, so the idea was around.
So, what was the point of a book like this? How was it actually used in a ritual?
Think of it as a practical handbook. These magical books, or grimoires, were often believed to hold power themselves, once consecrated.
So you didn't have to memorize it all?
Apparently not always. The idea was often that you'd open the consecrated book, read the conjurations aloud, and the spirits named within would be compelled to appear.
And if it didn't work?
You might even reconsecrate the book itself to boost its power. Agrippa warned about handling them carelessly after consecration, in case they opened by accident and caused trouble. So reading from the book seems to have been standard practice.
Can you give us a sense of the ritual in Tuba Veneris? What are the key steps?
Sure. It's quite elaborate. You've got the specific conjurations, including strange phrases like Zazaz, Zazaz Lametis, Natalis. Then there's the Seal of Venus itself. It's a complex diagram with Hebrew names of Venusian angels, Aniel, Hagiel, and others, plus planetary symbols and these geomantic characters.
Geomancy, that's a form of divination.
Yes, using figures formed by random points or lines. Characters like Rubius, Albus, Puella appear on the seal. The text links specific characters of Venus to geomancy too.
What else?
Timing is crucial. Preparing the tool is a horn, supposedly from a bull, and the sigil of Venus has to be done during the correct astrological day and hour of Venus.
Makes sense.
Creating the magic circle is also detailed. Drawn on parchment or special virgin paper, 3 concentric circles, specific diameters, inscribed with divine names, again, at Venus times.
And then invoking the spirits.
Yes. The 6 spirits, Moghrip, Amabosar, Alkazub, Belzezul, Falcaroth, Mefkazub. Each has their own invocation, repeating their name followed by specific phrases.
Is there a separate book involved?
Yes, it describes consecrating a little book to write the names and invocations in, believing this book itself would compel the spirits when opened.
And then what happens when the spirit shows up?
The text describes the procedure, what commands to give, but it also includes warnings. Don't use the spirits impiously, it could harm your soul.
Yeah.
And finally, there's a license to depart to formally dismiss them.
It's incredibly structured. Did this text influence later magic?
It seems so. Elements appear in later grimoires. A German text called the Inbegriff borrows rituals and conjurations, including the spirit name Amabosar. Another writer, Herpentel, describes a similar paper circle ritual, though his seal is for Jupiter. It shares the concept. So it had some circulation.
Okay, so bringing this all together, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the takeaway on John Dee?
Well, he's just profoundly complex, isn't he? He really embodies that Renaissance fluidity between mathematics, astronomy, natural philosophy, and, yes, occultism. These fields just weren't walled off the way they are now.
So we come back to that puzzle. How do we reconcile Dee, the respected mathematician, the advisor to navigators, with Dee, the angel scryer, and this figure potentially linked, even if maybe wrongly, to a negromantic text like Tuba Veneris?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe the fact that Tuba Veneris keeps being associated with him despite the evidence against his authorship.
No, why do you think that is?
Perhaps it speaks to how we want to see figures like the image of the powerful, learned Renaissance magus dabbling in dark arts. It's a compelling archetype. It reinforces that air of mystery around him. But his actual role, his true significance, is still something historians debate and try to piece together.
So, to sum up what we've explored, Dee's real mathematical contributions, his work in navigation and geometry, his attempt to apply math to astrology, and then this whole fascinating contested area around Tuba Veneris and his magical practices.
Right.
The aha moment for me, I think, is really internalizing that we can't judge him by today's strict categories. We have to see the interconnectedness of it all in his time.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. If Dee genuinely believed the universe ran on mathematical harmony, this divine plan, could his occult investigations, even the angel stuff, have been, from his perspective, just another way to try and understand those underlying principles? Another tool, alongside mathematics, to probe the secrets of creation, even if it's a tool we now place firmly outside science.
Seeking the same truth through different means.
Perhaps. It certainly challenges us to think about how different intellectual frameworks operate, and how tricky it is to really understand the mindset of the past.